guys, this is Strength is the Foundation Masters, strength training for the mature athlete. We're going to go through the structure of the hip. It's just a brief overview of how your hips are put together, and hopefully it's going to help you in your powerlifting, especially for your squat and your deadlifts. So it's the most powerful muscle group is the hip structure. If you've got good, powerful hips, you're going to be able to do things like your squats, your deadlifts, as you can see up here. If you look at any kind of sport that requires generating power, if you take boxing, when you're throwing a punch, if you take American football or rugby, when you're making a tackle, sprinters, especially, it's all, you've got to have a good, solid, well-developed hip structure. So I'm going to take you through a brief overview of how these hips are put together. So let's take a look at the joint actions of the hip. Hip joint is a ball and socket joint, the same as the shoulder, so it has the same joint actions, which are flexion, extension, adduction, and abduction. Yeah, so away and towards. Also horizontal adduction and abduction. So that's like when you're sitting on that, you know, that machine where you sit down and you move your knees outwards and inwards. So that's horizontal adduction and abduction. External rotation. Now I shout out an awful lot to my lifters. I'm saying knees out, knees out, knees out. So that's your external. That's the external rotation. It's really, really important in the squat. It helps you to get the femur out of the way, so that you can actually get the depth in your squat. The middle of your body or your torso can actually get through the hole, and you can actually get proper depth in your squat. So that's what the external rotation is all about. And of course, you've got internal rotation. Okay, I want to give out a big shout out to Brent Brookbush from the Brookbush Institute. He's got some really cool stuff on anatomy, and he's actually his teaching is actually so good that I can even understand anatomy because he teaches so well. And he gave me this little thing here about helping to remember the adductors and internal rotators. And this is a little thing called peanut butter leaves me greasy. Quite cool, really, because it helps you to remember each of these adductor muscles. So you've got your pectineus, your adductor brevis, longus, magnus, and gracilis. I put the magnus here on a separate piece because obviously you can't see it here, but it's a really big muscle. Yeah, it's got two heads as well. And funny enough, about the adductor magnus has two joint actions, two opposing joint actions. It's the only muscle in the body that I can think of right now, I may be wrong, that can actually do two opposing joint actions, and that is hip flexion and hip extension. The reason being is it's got two heads. It's got a anterior head and a posterior head, so attached to the anterior and posterior portions of the lower part of the pelvis. So that's why it can actually do those two joint actions. So it's a very big muscle. Adductor magnus, magnus meaning it's Latin for big. Very much like if you remember Magnus Samuelsson or Magnus von Magnusson, the strong men. So it kind of it's quite appropriate for those guys. You know, it means big. So it's the biggest adductor of the adductor group. But of course, and they also have an internal. They also internally rotate the hip as well. So these are your adductors. Really important for your squat, and you'll see later, really important for your sumo deadlift. Your adductors work extremely hard, especially the low bar squat, especially when you're pushing your knees out. They work eccentrically. They work very hard. Now over here we have got our abductors. Okay, so our taking away, and external rotators. So we've got here our glute min, glute med, and glute max. Glute max being the big house. Okay, so this is the single largest muscle in the human body. Yeah, it's even bigger. If you've got big pecs or big lats, it's bigger than that. Cross-sectionally as well, it's thick. So if you were to try and get a scalpel and try to get through to the underlying fibers of your deep external rotators here, you've got to go through a lot of muscle to get there. So it's a thick, solid piece of muscle, the glutes or the glute max. Your glute min, glute med, yeah, these guys, they help to stabilize that pelvis for you. So you really want to be working on those for balance, for stability. So a lot of your single leg work is going to be helping to develop your glute min and glute med. They're also adductors, but they help to stabilize as well when you're on one leg. So like your single leg RDLs, your split squats, your reverse lunges, your forward lunges, your rear elevated split squats. All of those these guys here help to stabilize that pelvis when you're doing those movements. So of course it's going to be very, very helpful if you're going to be walking out a 200, 250 squat. You want your pelvis to be nice and solid and strong and level, don't you? You don't want any movement right there because obviously that's also going to affect the spine because it affects the entire core stability. There's this whole hip structure right here. You've also got this piriformis, which is your external rotator, and you've got I've labeled here sciatic nerve. Now that's the largest nerve in the human body. The sciatic nerve runs right down the back of the leg. Sometimes you might have heard of sciatica, and that's when this nerve gets irritated. I'm not saying this is always the case, but in some cases, in the context of what we're doing as powerlifters, this piriformis here kind of tends to annoy this nerve, and you kind of like feel sensation down the back of your leg. So it's all to do with the posture of the way you're sitting. If you're sitting for long hours and this guy gets a little bit lazy, then what's going to happen is the sciatic nerve, which is right here, is going to get a little bit upset. The sciatic nerve. So this piriformis just over here tends to knock on that a little bit. So you've also got your biceps femoris, which helps with external rotation. Okay, any muscle in the body, if it can help, it will help. So it's a bit more. It's kind of like a bit of a synergist with your external rotation. And of course, in here you've got your deep external rotators right there. Hip flexors. Okay, so with the hip flexor, I'll just get a little palette here. This guy here is your psoas major. Okay, now that's a big old muscle. And if you look here, all the way down from here to here, that's your lumbar spine. Okay, so this hip flexor here, or psoas major, is actually attached to that lumbar spine and crosses the hip joint. Yeah. So if you can imagine, if this guy gets tight, so when you're sitting an awful lot, so it's a hip flexor. So when you're sitting down, your hip is flexed. If this guy gets tight, then when you stand up, you imagine that pulling on your lower back. And that's one reason why we get back pain, too much sitting. And the reason being is because of this guy getting tight here. You've got the iliacus, which is also a hip flexor. So that's just about here. Okay, and that also gets quite tight. So so long hours of sitting, you need to make sure that you stretch those hip flexors, or you work them to a point where they are moving optimally. Yes. Oh, TFL, tensor fasciae lata. Now this guy is also a hip flexor. Interesting thing about this is it uses this fiber. I will just label it here. This fiber right here, it uses it as a tendon. Okay, and that is your IT band, or iliotibial tract. So that's the IT band. So if you've ever been told to or tried to foam roll your IT band, I got this also from Brent Brookbush as well. Don't, because you're trying to foam roll fascia, really tight, solid fascia. So So don't do it. I mean, you can get the muscles around it, but if you're thinking of trying to loosen this IT band, and that's because there's a syndrome called runner's knee, where this IT band gets quite tight and it pulls on the lateral portion of the knee, gives you a bit of knee pain. And mostly, if you think about it, if I just get this color back here, if we look at this IT band, or this TFL right here, attached to the IT band, if this is a hip flexor and we're sitting down an awful lot, so I imagine this guy can also become overactive or tight. So if it does become overactive or tight, that's going to be pulling on that iliotibial tract, or your TFL, your IT band. Yeah, so your TFL will pull on your IT band. So don't foam roll it. Just an extra note about your TFL. If you want to relieve a bit of stress on here, on this IT band, start foam rolling this. Yeah, so you can foam roll on your TFL, or you can get a lacrosse ball into this portion just here, and that can relieve pressure on this IT band. Labeled here the rectus femoris, that is part of the quadriceps, crosses the hip joint, also crosses the knee. So it's a knee extension is a function, but also it's a hip flexor as well. So that's why I labeled that guy as well. And our hip extensors. So again, I've just mentioned, yeah, you've got the big house, which is your glute max. Yeah, just here, and also the structure of the hamstrings, your biceps femoris, semitendinosus, semimembranosus. So these three muscles here is your hamstring group. They're also massive hip extensors. So both of these muscles work to extend the hip. So just to recap on the hip structure. So you've got sumo deadlifts, and I did mention before that your adductors are really quite key in your sumo deadlift and in your squat because they work really hard eccentrically to get the in the case of your sumo deadlift. You look here, you're getting your knees out, you're trying to get a vertical shin angle. So your adductors are actually working really hard eccentrically to get to that position, so they can wind up and then they can help with the quads and the glutes to help finish the move as you would over here. Adductors also work extremely hard in the eccentric portion of the squat. So we've got our knees out, okay? So we're using our external rotators, but we're also using eccentrically our adductors because they're stretching out as you're getting deeper and deeper into the hole. With the conventional deadlift like this, it's mainly hip extension, knee extension. So not so much on the adductors for this guy right here, but massively in your sumo deadlift and in your squat. It's really important. And here are just a few moves that I do to help with working all of that hip structure. So this guy here is called a half Copenhagen plank, side plank. That's going to work the adductors right here. So my hip is coming down to the floor like this, and then I'm using the power of the adductors to get back up and to try and get myself into a nice straight line here. So, but that's a real. I mean, I do this on the knee. That's a half Copenhagen side plank. It's really tough to do. It's really hard on the adductors. So I'd go easy on this one to start off with. If you can like statically hold that for 5-10 seconds to start off with, that would be a good place to start. And with this, then you can actually start doing reps, which is the harder version. Then the progression from that would be holding the ankle on the edge, and then to increase the length of the moment arm and increase the tension on the adductors. The old classic single leg RDL here. Key for the RDL is to keep is a decent hip hinge, so keeping the upper body and the moving leg perfectly in line and perfectly straight and rigid. So that's going to be working hugely, squeezing that back glute, but it's also going to be working primarily hamstring and the glutes on the standing leg. You've got your split squat. This is an RNT split squat, reactive neuromuscular training. So what I've done is I've attached a band to the lateral head of the or lateral side of the knee. Okay, so it's giving me some medial force from this position here, and what that's forcing me to do is force my knees out. So I've got my external rotators working really hard to stay on all of the time, all the way through the descent and ascent of this split squat. So this RNT split squat is a really good one to help work on those deep external rotators and external rotators. This guy here is a single leg hip, I call it a hip lift rather than a hip thrust, because we're trying to lift our hips off the floor in a controlled manner. We're not trying to just thrust up and down with our hips. We're just trying to hold them in a controlled manner. So what I'm trying to achieve here is shoulders and hips in a nice straight line. I'm squeezing that glute on the other side, and the bit that you actually can't see is that my heel is dug into the floor, so that I can actually get a good purchase on the floor, and I lift up the hip, squeeze, and then back down again. The reason why this leg here, I've put this leg up, I'll tell you why, is it prevents me from, because the hip extensors are your glutes and your hamstrings, right? I don't want to mimic hip extension by getting lumbar extension. Okay, so that is basically, if you start hyperextending at the lumbar spine, you're going to think you're getting hip extension, and you're not. You're actually working your lower back. We don't want to be doing that. So having this leg up here actually helps that. It helps you to stop extending at the lumbar spine and make sure that you're extending using the glutes and the hamstrings. Well, that's it, guys. That's just I hope that's given you a nice overview of the structure of the hip and how important it is to us as powerlifters. This is, you know, just a picture of me with my knees out, showing that the knees are out. Yeah, so therefore my adductors are working extremely hard eccentrically to get myself in that position. My external rotators are working extremely hard as well, and then to get myself out of here, you know, my hip flexors, etc., are all going to be working extremely hard. So the moral of this story is that, like, really look after your hips. So if you like these videos, please hit subscribe, and then I'll see you guys again soon.